Shadows danced across the imported Italian marble floors of the Tribeca penthouse, hiding secrets that $1 billion couldn't bury. D'Andre Cavallo had the world at his feet, silently ruling the largest underground syndicate in New York City. Yet the only thing he couldn't control was the loyalty of the woman wearing his 6-carat Cartier engagement ring. To uncover her true intentions, he orchestrated the ultimate deception, stripping away his empire overnight to see if she loved the man or the money. He fully expected betrayal. What he didn't expect was that the quiet, overweight housekeeper scrubbing his floors would be the one to uncover a conspiracy so sinister it would threaten to bring his entire underworld empire crashing down. D'Andre Cavallo did not trust easily. You didn't survive at the helm of the most feared organized crime family on the eastern seaboard by taking people at their word. His empire spanned from the shipping ports of New Jersey to the luxury high-rises of Manhattan, a labyrinth of shell companies, legitimate construction fronts, and ruthless enforcement. Yet, sitting in his custom-tailored Brioni suit, in the study of his $40 million penthouse, D'Andre found himself plagued by a mundane, almost pathetic paranoia. It was about Serafina. Serafina Montgomery was a vision of Upper East Side perfection. She possessed sharp cheekbones, silken blonde hair that cascaded perfectly over her shoulders, and a pedigree that included summers in the Hamptons and winters in Gestad. She was the kind of woman who looked natural holding a flute of Dom Perignon or draped in chinchilla. D'Andre had proposed to her 6 months ago, placing a blinding Cartier diamond on her finger at a private table at Le Bernardin. Since then, however, a gnawing suspicion had taken root in his chest. Serafina was obsessed with the perks of his powered private jets, the Black American Express card, the fear she could strike into the hearts of maître d's and boutique managers on Madison Avenue. But did she care for D'Andre, the man who carried the heavy, dark weight of the syndicate? He needed to know, before he tied his bloodline to hers, before he made her the matriarch of the Cavallo family. He had to test her. Enter Beatrice Miller. Beatrice was the head maid of the penthouse. She was a fat woman, a physical reality that she had long accepted and that society frequently used as an excuse to render her entirely invisible. In the high-stakes, hyper-glamorous world of D'Andre and Serafina, Beatrice was little more than a piece of moving furniture. She was 34, with kind, observant brown eyes and a uniform that always felt a little too tight across her broad shoulders and heavy hips. Beatrice worked grueling hours, sweeping up shattered crystal when D'Andre's temper flared, and meticulously organizing Serafina's endless collection of Christian Louboutin heels. She endured Serafina's sharp, cruel comments about her weight with silent grace, motivated solely by the crushing medical bills her mother was accumulating at Mount Sinai Hospital. Because Beatrice was invisible, she saw everything. She noticed how D'Andre's jaw clenched when Serafina casually spent $50,000 on a Tuesday afternoon. She noticed how Serafina never once asked about D'Andre's day, only about his acquisitions. Late one Tuesday evening, D'Andre summoned his right-hand man, Silas Graham, into the soundproofed study. Beatrice was polishing the mahogany hallway table just outside, her movements slow and rhythmic, her presence entirely ignored by Silas as he pushed past her, bringing a scent of stale cigarette smoke and expensive cologne into the apartment. When the heavy oak door closed, it didn't shut tight. A millimeter of space remained, enough for Beatrice to hear the low, rumbling baritone of her employer. "I want the accounts frozen, Silas," D'Andre commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. The offshore Cayman funds, the Swiss safety deposit boxes, the legitimate holdings through Vanguard. All of it. Make it look like the feds raided the primary shell corporation. I want a paper trail that screams I'm ruined. Boss, with all due respect, that's going to cause a panic on the streets, Silas warned. The capos won't like hearing you're bleeding cash. They won't hear about it. This is highly compartmentalized. Only you, my primary accountant, and I will know. I'm going to tell Serafina that I have been indicted, that the feds have seized everything under RICO, and that I am effectively bankrupt. DeAndre paused, the silence heavy. I need to know if she'll stand by a broke man facing 20 years, or if she'll run. And if she runs, Silas asked. Then I have my answer, and she leaves with nothing, DeAndre replied coldly. Set it up for Thursday. Beatrice held her breath, her dusting cloth frozen on the wood. A fake bankruptcy, a mafia boss playing a dangerous game of emotional roulette. She quietly backed away from the door, her soft, heavy footsteps making no sound on the thick Persian runner. She felt a flicker of pity for DeAndre, for all his terrifying power, for all the men who bowed to him. He was just a lonely man, terrified of being used. But Beatrice also felt a shiver of dread. She knew Serafina Montgomery better than DeAndre did. She cleaned up the woman's messes. She knew that Serafina was not just spoiled. She was deeply, fundamentally ruthless. If DeAndre took away the money, Beatrice knew exactly what Serafina would do. Or so she thought. Thursday arrived with a meticulously orchestrated storm. DeAndre's acting was flawless. He burst into the penthouse just after noon, his tie loosened, his hair disheveled, bypassing the usual security protocol. He barked orders at his bodyguards to wait in the lobby. Beatrice was in the kitchen meticulously dicing vegetables for a mirepoix, her large apron wrapped securely around her waist. She stopped cutting as she heard DeAndre's heavy, frantic boots on the marble. Serafina was lounging on the curved velvet sofa in the living room, flipping through an issue of Vogue, a half-empty glass of mimosa in her hand. "Dom, what are you doing home?" "You're supposed to be at the Staten Island site," she drawled, not looking up. "It's gone, Sarah," DeAndre rasped, sinking into an armchair opposite her. He buried his face in his hands. "It's all gone." Serafina slowly lowered the magazine. Beatrice, holding a dish towel, stood paralyzed behind the kitchen island, perfectly positioned to watch the scene unfold through the open concept layout. "What are you talking about?" Serafina asked, her voice tight. "The feds. They raided the holding company. They found the ledger," DeAndre lied smoothly, his voice shaking with a manufactured terror that sent chills down Beatrice's spine. "They've frozen the accounts. The IRS is seizing the properties. The penthouse, the cars, the offshore money, it's all inaccessible. I'm bankrupt, Sarah. Worse, they're preparing an indictment. I could be looking at a minimum of 20 years. Beatrice watched Serafina's face. She expected the beautiful socialite to scream, to cry, to immediately demand answers. Instead, Serafina's expression went utterly blank. It was a terrifying, dead emptiness. The mask of the loving, pampered fiancée shattered, revealing something cold and reptilian underneath. For a long, agonizing minute, there was only the sound of the ticking grandfather clock in the foyer. "Bankrupt," Serafina repeated, testing the word on her tongue like a bitter pill. "Everything is gone. Even the trust you set up for me." "Seized," DeAndre said, looking up at her with pleading, desperate eyes. "I have nothing but the cash in my safe, and even that won't last. I'm so sorry, Sarah, but we have each other. We can rebuild. I have loyal men. We just need to lay low, maybe leave the country. Leave the country." Serafina stood up abruptly, smoothing down her designer silk trousers. "Live like fugitives? DeAndre, look at me. Do I look like a woman who goes on the run and lives in a motel? Sarah, please. I need you right now." DeAndre reached out for her hand. Serafina stepped back, Expertly avoiding his touch, Beatrice squeezed the dish towel in her thick hands, her heart pounding. This was it. The gold digger was going to pack her Louis Vuitton trunks and march out the door. DeAndre would be heartbroken, but he would be safe from her greed. But then Serafina did something entirely unexpected. The coldness vanished, replaced instantly by a facade of forced, breathless panic. She fell to her knees in front of DeAndre, grabbing his hands. "Oh my God, DeAndre, I'm just in shock," she cried, her voice trembling. "Of course I'll stay. We'll fight this. I won't leave you. We are a team." DeAndre's shoulders slumped in relief. He pulled her into a tight embrace, burying his face in her blonde hair. Thank you, Sarah. You don't know what this means to me." Over DeAndre's shoulder, Beatrice saw Serafina's face. The woman wasn't crying. Her eyes were dry, narrowed, and intensely calculating. She was staring blankly at the wall, her mind working 1,000,000 miles a minute. Beatrice retreated into the depths of the kitchen, her mind racing. Why didn't she leave? If the money was gone, what was keeping Serafina here? A woman like her didn't stay out of the goodness of her heart. The answer began to reveal itself over the next 48 hours. The atmosphere in the penthouse grew toxic. DeAndre spent his days locked in his study, supposedly dealing with lawyers and scrambling for funds, playing his part to the hilt. Serafina, meanwhile, began behaving erratically. She stopped leaving the apartment for her usual spa days and shopping sprees. Instead, she paced the floors, constantly texting on a burner phone Beatrice had never seen before. Beatrice, going about her duties, vacuuming the rugs, doing the laundry, changing the sheets, became a ghost haunting the edges of Serafina's frantic reality. On Saturday afternoon, DeAndre left the apartment for a clandestine meeting with a capo. Beatrice was in the master suite, gathering discarded clothes. Serafina was in the adjoining master bathroom, the door slightly ajar. "I don't care what you heard. He says the money is gone," Serafina hissed into her phone. Her voice was vicious, stripped of its usual melodic cadence. "Seized by the feds. Yes, all of it." A pause. "No, I can't just leave. If I leave now, I get nothing. We had an agreement, Victor." Beatrice froze. Victor. The name dropped into her stomach like a lead weight. Viktor Volkov was the head of the Bratva, the Russian syndicate that had been locked in a bloody, silent turf war with DeAndre's family for the past 3 years. DeAndre despised Volkov. "If the assets are frozen, the original plan is useless," Serafina continued, pacing furiously across the marble bathroom floor. "He's useless alive. If he goes to prison, the feds keep everything. But if he dies before the indictment comes down, the frozen assets go into probate. As his documented fiancée and the primary beneficiary of his will, I can contest the seizure. We can use your lawyers to unfreeze the shell accounts before the government locks them down permanently." Beatrice clapped a heavy hand over her own mouth to stifle a gasp. "Yes," Serafina whispered into the phone, her tone venomous. "I'm starting tonight. The dosage will be higher. I want him gone by Tuesday. Then you get your territory, and I get my cut." Beatrice backed out of the bedroom, her legs trembling under her considerable weight. She stumbled into the hallway, leaning against the cool wallpaper, gasping for air. This wasn't a gold digger holding on to a false hope. This was a black widow. Serafina wasn't just working with DeAndre's worst enemy. She was actively planning to murder him for a payout she believed was still hidden in probate. The fake bankruptcy hadn't just exposed Serafina's lack of love. It had backed her into a corner, accelerating a lethal timeline. DeAndre's test was about to get him killed. The kitchen of the penthouse was Beatrice's domain. It was a sprawling stainless steel masterpiece equipped with industrial-grade appliances and the walk-in pantry that rivaled a small grocery store. It was here, amidst the pots and pans, that Beatrice felt most in control of her life. But tonight, the kitchen felt like a morgue. It was 7 p.m. DeAndre had returned from his fake meetings, looking intentionally exhausted. As was his nightly ritual, he requested a glass of Macallan 25-year-old Scotch, neat. Usually, Beatrice poured it and brought it to his study on a silver tray. Tonight, Serafina intercepted her. "I'll take it to him, Beatrice," Serafina said, breezing into the kitchen. She was wearing a sheer silk robe, her blonde hair perfectly tousled. She shot Beatrice a look of thinly veiled disgust, her eyes lingering on the maid's heavy waistline. "Go clean the guest bathrooms. You missed a spot on the mirror this morning." "Yes, Miss Montgomery," Beatrice said softly, keeping her eyes downcast. She stepped away from the counter, but she didn't leave the kitchen. She retreated into the shadows of the butler's pantry, leaving the door cracked just enough to see the island. Serafina poured the amber liquid into a heavy crystal tumbler. Then she reached into the pocket of her silk robe. Beatrice watched, her heart hammering against her ribs, as Serafina pulled out a tiny, clear glass vial. It was no bigger than a tube of lipstick. With practiced ease, Serafina unscrewed the cap and let 3 drops of a colorless liquid fall into the expensive scotch. She gave the glass a gentle swirl, smiled at her reflection in the dark window panes, and walked out of the kitchen. Beatrice was paralyzed. Poison. It wasn't a theory anymore. It was happening right in front of her. She had to do something. But what? If she ran into the study and knocked the glass out of DeAndre's hand, who would he believe? His beautiful, aristocratic fiancée who was supposedly standing by him in his darkest hour, or the fat, invisible maid who had no proof? Serafina would simply say Beatrice was crazy, or worse, that Beatrice had tried to poison him herself. DeAndre was a ruthless mafia boss. He didn't call the police when he felt threatened. He made people disappear. Beatrice hurried to the kitchen island. She checked the trash can beneath the sink. Empty. Serafina had kept the vial. Panic threatened to overwhelm Beatrice. She thought of her mother, lying in the hospital bed, relying on the paycheck Beatrice brought home every week. If she crossed Serafina and failed, she would be fired, or worse, killed. She could just pack her things, walk out the service elevator, and never come back. Let the monsters destroy each other. But as Beatrice looked at the empty crystal decanter, a wave of profound anger washed over her. She was tired of being stepped on. She was tired of monsters like Serafina using people, treating them like disposable garbage. DeAndre Cavallo was a criminal, yes. But in the 3 years Beatrice had worked for him, he had paid for her mother's physical therapy out of pocket when her insurance denied it. He had never once insulted her. He demanded perfection, but he was fair. He didn't deserve to be murdered in his own home by a traitor. Beatrice made her decision. She wasn't going to run. But she wasn't going to confront them directly either. She needed proof. Irrefutable, undeniable proof that even a man blinded by a fake bankruptcy could not ignore. The next morning, the penthouse was quiet. DeAndre was sleeping late, the poison likely making him lethargic, a symptom Serafina probably dismissed as depression over his ruined empire. Serafina had gone to the private gym in the building, confident that her plan was working flawlessly. Beatrice slipped into the master suite. Her heart was beating so fast she felt dizzy. She moved with surprising agility for a woman of her size, her soft-soled shoes making no sound. She went straight to Serafina's lavish walk-in closet, a room larger than Beatrice's entire apartment in Queens. She began to search. She checked the pockets of designer coats, the hidden compartments of Hermes Birkin bags, the velvet linings of jewelry boxes. She knew Serafina was arrogant. Arrogant people got sloppy. 10 minutes passed. Her palms were sweating. If Serafina walked in now, Beatrice was dead. Finally, in the very back of a drawer, dedicated entirely to silk scarves. Beatrice's hand brushed against something hard. She pulled out a small, ornate makeup bag. Inside, nestled between high-end lipsticks and a compact mirror, was the small glass vial. It was half empty. Beatrice pulled out her phone and snapped several clear, high-resolution photos of the vial and its hiding place. But photos weren't enough. She needed the physical evidence. She carefully placed the vial in the pocket of her apron. But as she turned to leave the closet, she noticed something else. A single father named, but would unravel his entire world. Permanently with permanently etched into the same phone Serafina had used to call Viktor Volkov. Beatrice grabbed it. It was locked with a passcode. She cursed under her breath. She didn't know the code, but she knew someone who could crack it. The Andre's security team. Clutching the phone and the vial, Beatrice hurried out of the master suite. She had the weapon and the communication line. Now she just needed to get them to the one man who could protect DeAndre without alerting Serafina. She needed to find Silas Graham. Beatrice rushed down the service hallway, intending to use the staff phone to call Silas's private line. But as she rounded the corner near the service elevator, she slammed directly into a solid wall of muscle. She gasped, stumbling backward, dropping her dust cloth, but instinctively keeping her hand clamped over the apron pocket, holding the vial and the phone. Standing over her, his expression cold and unreadable, was Silas. "Going somewhere in a hurry, Beatrice?" Silas asked, his dark eyes narrowing as he took in her flushed face and panicked demeanor. "Mr. Graham," Beatrice stammered, her voice shaking. I need to speak with you. It's urgent. It's about Mr. Cavallo." Silas crossed his arms, his massive frame blocking the only exit. "DeAndre is resting. Whatever it is, you can tell me." Beatrice looked up at the terrifying enforcer. She had to trust him. He was DeAndre's right hand. Taking a deep breath, she pulled the small glass vial and the black burner phone from her pocket and held them out. "Mr. Cavallo isn't resting," Beatrice said, her voice steadying with sudden, fierce resolve. "He's being poisoned, and Miss Montgomery is working with the Bradford to do it." Silas stared at the items in her hand, the air in the hallway growing suddenly, violently still. Silas Graham did not gasp, he did not widen his eyes. A man who had survived 2 decades in the unforgiving crossfire of New York's underworld possessed a face carved from granite. But the silence that descended upon the service hallway was heavier than any physical weight. He looked at the tiny glass vial resting in Beatrice's shaking palm, and then at the sleek black burner phone. Slowly, Silas reached out and took the items. His large fingers, calloused from years of handling firearms and heavy machinery, closed over the evidence. "If you are lying to me, Beatrice," Silas said, his voice dropping to a terrifying subsonic rumble, "if this is some sort of extortion attempt, I will ensure you are never seen again." "I'm not lying," Beatrice whispered fiercely, tears of sheer adrenaline pricking the corners of her eyes. She put 3 drops of that into his Macallan last night. She was talking to Viktor Volkov on that phone. She said the fake bankruptcy forced her hand. She wants Mr. Cavallo dead by Tuesday so she can claim the probate assets before the federal indictment freezes them permanently. Silas' jaw tightened so hard a muscle ticked visibly in his cheek. He grabbed Beatrice by the upper arm, not hard enough to bruise, but firmly enough to let her know she was not permitted to leave, and steered her toward the service stairs. They descended 1 flight to a secure, windowless room that served as the penthouse's central nervous system. Banks of monitors displayed every angle of the building, and a heavy steel door locked behind them with a definitive click. Silas bypassed the standard monitors and pulled a ruggedized Panasonic Toughbook from a locked drawer. He connected the burner phone via a specialized adapter. Bradver encryption is notoriously sloppy if you catch them on a burner, Silas muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Lines of code cascaded down the screen. We use an Israeli decryption software. It takes minutes if the passcode is standard. Beatrice stood awkwardly in the corner, her hands nervously twisting her apron. 3 agonizing minutes passed. Then the screen flashed green. Silas opened the message logs. He didn't say a word. He just read. The color drained from his face, replaced by a storm of cold, calculated fury. He disconnected the phone and turned to a small chemical testing kit he kept for analyzing street-level narcotics. He carefully uncapped the vial Beatrice had found, extracted a microscopic drop with a pipette, and dropped it onto a reactive strip. The strip turned a violent, undeniable shade of purple. Aconite, Silas breathed, staring at the strip. Wolfsbane. Highly toxic, mimics a massive cardiac event, leaves almost no trace if the coroner isn't specifically looking for it. He turned his dark gaze onto Beatrice. You saved his life. We need to wake him up, Beatrice urged, her fear entirely replaced by a desperate need to protect the man who had shown her small, quiet kindnesses. Silas nodded grimly. Wait here. 10 minutes later, the heavy steel door opened. DeAndre Cavallo walked in, supported heavily by Silas. The Mafia boss looked terrible. His skin was an ashen gray, dark circles carved deep shadows under his eyes, and his usually impeccably styled dark hair was matted with sweat. The first dose of the poison had already ravaged his system. DeAndre sank into a leather chair, breathing heavily. Silas placed the tough book, the phone, and the chemical test on the desk in front of him. Read the transcripts, boss, Silas said quietly. DeAndre leaned forward. Beatrice watched as the man who commanded thousands of loyal soldiers read the digital proof of his fiancée's betrayal. He read the texts between Serafina and Viktor Volkov. He read her complaints about his fake bankruptcy, her disgust at the thought of being poor, and her cold, clinical agreement to murder him for a percentage of his territory and his probate wealth. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the room. DeAndre didn't yell. He didn't throw the laptop. Instead, a profound, chilling emptiness washed over his features. The illusion of the loving woman he had planned to marry shattered completely, leaving behind a jagged, bleeding reality. He slowly looked up, his gaze locking onto Beatrice. He had walked past her 1,000 times. He had eaten the meals she prepared, walked on the floors she polished, and worn the clothes she ironed. She had been invisible, but right now she was the only real thing in his fractured world. Why? DeAndre asked, his voice a raspy whisper. You could have walked away. You could have blackmailed her. You could have let me die. Beatrice stood tall despite her exhaustion. Because you paid for my mother's physical therapy at Mount Sinai when the insurance cut her off, Mr. Cavallo. You didn't even tell me you did it. The hospital just said an anonymous donor covered the balance. You might be a dangerous man, but you have honor. Miss Montgomery has none. She treats people like dirt, and I am tired of letting people like her win. DeAndre stared at her, genuinely humbled. The ultimate test he had designed had failed spectacularly, yet it had inadvertently revealed the truest loyalty where he least expected it. Tuesday, DeAndre murmured, looking back at the screen. She wants me dead by Tuesday. Volkov is supposed to move on the docks the moment she signals my heart has stopped. DeAndre's gray face slowly transformed. The exhaustion was replaced by the terrifying, predatory intelligence that had made him a king. He looked at Silas. We don't arrest her. We don't confront her, DeAndre commanded, his voice suddenly sharp and clear. We play the game. We let her think she's winning. We are going to draw Volkov out of his rat hole, right into this penthouse. The weekend was an agonizing exercise in psychological warfare. Beatrice returned to her duties, a ghost once more, But this time, she was a ghost with a mission. She observed Serafina with a new clinical detachment. Serafina was a phenomenal actress. She hovered over DeAndre, dabbing his sweating forehead with cool cloths, her face a mask of tragic, aristocratic sorrow. "I'm so worried about you, Dom," Serafina cooed on Sunday evening, sitting on the edge of the master bed. "The stress of this bankruptcy, the impending indictment, it's destroying your heart." DeAndre, playing his part flawlessly, offered a weak, trembling smile. "I'll be fine, Sarah, as long as I have you." Beatrice stood by the door holding a silver tray with DeAndre's evening scotch. Her hands were perfectly steady. Per Silas's instructions, the drink was completely untainted. DeAndre would take a sip, pretend to swallow, and pour the rest into a potted ficus when Serafina wasn't looking. To maintain the illusion of his rapid decline, Silas had provided DeAndre with safe, temporary beta blockers to artificially lower his heart rate and make him appear pale and clammy. "Beatrice, put the tray down and leave us," Serafina snapped, not looking back. "And stop breathing so heavily, it's distracting." "Yes, Miss Montgomery," Beatrice murmured, bowing her head. She set the tray down and retreated, catching a fleeting, microscopic nod of gratitude from DeAndre, before she closed the heavy mahogany door. Down in the security room, Silas was mobilizing the Empire. The bankruptcy was still the official narrative on the streets, but DeAndre's most trusted capos, the men who had bled for him, were quietly brought into the fold. They were shown the decryption logs. The rage among the Cavallo ranks was absolute. The Bratva was attempting a decapitation strike using a Trojan horse. By Monday afternoon, the trap was primed. Serafina, growing impatient and overconfident, made a fatal error. Beatrice was in the adjoining dressing room, organizing silk ties when she heard Serafina on the burner-phone. "He's fading fast, Victor," Serafina said, her voice dripping with anticipation. "He can barely keep his eyes open. Tomorrow night. I'll give him the final dose. His heart won't be able to take it." "Are you certain the assets are accessible?" Volkov's heavily accented voice crackled through the receiver. "My lawyer checked the probate filings. As long as he dies before a federal judge signs the RICO seizure order, the wealth transfers to me as the sole beneficiary of the estate. I will authorize the transfer of the shipping port deeds to your holding companies the moment his death certificate is signed." She paused, a cruel smile evident in her voice. "Come to the penthouse tomorrow night at 9. The service elevator code is 44492. Bring your men. We can celebrate our new partnership over his corpse." Beatrice relayed the conversation word for word to Silas. She invited him in. Silas smiled, a terrifying expression that resembled a wolf baring its teeth. "Volkov is arrogant enough to come. He wants to see DeAndre fall with his own eyes." Tuesday arrived heavy with the promise of violence. The air in the penthouse felt thick, charged with static electricity. At 7 p.m., Serafina ordered Beatrice to prepare a special dinner. "Something light," she instructed, her eyes glittering with malicious excitement. "Mr. Cavallo's stomach is very weak tonight. And bring his scotch to the study at 8. I will administer his medication." Beatrice nodded subserviently. She went to the kitchen and prepared a delicate consommé. At exactly 7:55 p.m., she poured the Macallan. She placed the heavy crystal glass on the silver tray. Serafina breezed into the kitchen, wearing a stunning black Saint Laurent dress-morning attire, chosen in advance. She pulled the small glass vial from her clutch. She didn't even bother to hide her actions from Beatrice anymore. The maid was just a piece of furniture, completely irrelevant to the grand design. Serafina squeezed 5 heavy drops of the aconite into the scotch. She swirled the glass. "Take it to him," Serafina commanded. "And Beatrice, after you serve him, take the rest of the night off. Go back to whatever hole you live in. You're fired." "Thank you, Miss Montgomery," Beatrice said softly. Beatrice picked up the tray. She walked out of the kitchen, down the long, shadowed hallway toward the study. But she didn't go into the room. She stepped into the adjoining powder room. She poured the poisoned scotch directly down the sink, rinsing the glass thoroughly. From a hidden flask Silas had provided, she refilled the glass with identical-looking apple juice. She walked into the study. DeAndre was slumped in his leather chair, looking like a man on the brink of death. Silas stood in the shadows near the heavy drapes. Beatrice placed the glass on the desk. "She put 5 drops in, Mr. Cavallo. She fired me. Volkov is arriving at 9. DeAndre picked up the glass of apple juice. He looked at Beatrice, the exhaustion fading from his eyes, replaced by the burning fire of a man reclaiming his throne. "You did perfectly, Beatrice," DeAndre said softly. "Now go to the panic room. Lock the door. Do not come out until Silas tells you it's safe." Beatrice nodded. As she turned to leave, DeAndre stopped her. "Beatrice." She looked back. "When this is over," DeAndre said, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "you will never scrub another floor as long as you live." Beatrice hurried down the hall, slipping into the hidden safe room behind the library bookcases. She locked the heavy steel door, sinking into a plush chair, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. At 8:55 p.m., the private elevator chimed. Through the security monitors in the panic room, Beatrice watched the final act begin. Serafina stood in the foyer, a black widow waiting for her prize. The elevator doors slid open, and Viktor Volkov stepped out, flanked by 4 heavily armed Bratva enforcers. The trap was sprung. Footsteps echoed sharply against the imported Italian marble of the penthouse foyer. Viktor Volkov stepped out of the private elevator, a towering figure draped in a custom charcoal Tom Ford overcoat. He brought with him the bitter chill of the New York night and the unmistakable arrogance of a man who believed he had just won a war without firing a single bullet. Flanking him were 4 heavily muscled Bratva enforcers, their hands resting ominously inside the lapels of their jackets, gripping suppressed Glock 19s. Serafina glided forward to meet them, her black Saint Laurent dress whispering against the floor. She offered Volkov a brilliant, predatory smile, her eyes alight with the thrill of her impending wealth. "Victor," she purred, extending a manicured hand. "Right on time." Volkov took her hand, his pale eyes sweeping the opulent, silent penthouse. "Is it done, Serafina? I do not like leaving loose ends." "He took his final dose of the medication an hour ago," Serafina replied, a faint sigh escaping her lips. "His heart simply couldn't handle the stress of the bankruptcy. The poor man passed away in his study. It was very peaceful." "And the staff?" Volkov asked, his accent thick and grating in the quiet space. "Dismissed," Serafina assured him, turning toward the long hallway. "The fat maid who usually hovers around was fired an hour ago. We are entirely alone. Come, let us finalize our arrangement over the corpse of the great DeAndre Cavallo." From the safety of the panic room, Beatrice watched the black and white security monitors, her hand clamped over her mouth. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She watched the group move down the corridor, a procession of vipers heading straight for the lion's den. Serafina reached the heavy mahogany doors of the study. She paused, taking a deep, dramatic breath to compose her features into a mask of mourning, just in case any hidden cameras were recording. Then, she pushed the double doors open. The study was dimly lit, illuminated only by the warm, flickering glow of the marble fireplace and the single brass reading lamp on the massive oak desk. The high-backed leather executive chair was turned away from the door, facing the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering Manhattan skyline. A solitary hand rested on the armrest, perfectly still. "DeAndre?" Serafina called out, her voice laced with a sickly sweet manufactured sorrow. She stepped into the room, Volkov and his men fanning out behind her. "DeAndre, darling?" When there was no answer, Volkov let out a low, booming laugh. "The King of New York," the Russian mocked, pulling a silver cigarette case from his coat. "Reduced to a footnote by a pretty face and a few drops of wolfsbane. Truly pathetic." "Now, Victor," Serafina said, turning to him with a calculating gleam in her eye. "About the transfer of the Brooklyn shipyards." The heavy leather chair slowly swiveled around. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen straight out of the room. DeAndre Cavallo was not dead. He was not even pale. He sat perfectly upright, his custom Bryony suit immaculate, his dark eyes burning with a terrifying, absolute clarity. In his right hand, he held a crystal tumbler filled with a dark amber liquid. He took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the silence stretch until it was agonizing. "The shipyards are not for sale, Victor," DeAndre said, his voice a smooth, lethal baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. "And my heart is exceptionally healthy." Serafina staggered backward, all the blood draining from her face. Her perfectly styled blonde hair seemed to lose its luster in an instant. She opened her mouth to speak, but only a strangled, breathless squeak emerged. Dom, you're..." How Volkov reacted with the instincts of a cornered predator. He barked an order in Russian, and his 4 enforcers whipped their suppressed weapons from their coats, aiming directly at DeAndre. "I wouldn't," a new, terrifyingly calm voice echoed from the shadows of the library alcove. Silas Graham stepped into the firelight. He held a fully automatic Heckler & Koch MP5, aimed squarely at Volkov's chest. But Silas was not alone. From the adjoining billiard room, from behind the heavy velvet drapes, and from the soundproofed hallway behind the enforcers, a dozen of DeAndre's most elite, battle-hardened capos materialized. The metallic clicks of safeties being disengaged echoed in a deadly symphony around the room. Laser sights painted Volkov and his men in a constellation of lethal red dots. They were hopelessly outnumbered and outgunned. The trap had snapped shut with flawless precision. Volkov froze, his cigarette case slipping from his fingers to clatter loudly against the hardwood floor. He slowly raised his hands, his pale eyes darting around the room, assessing the fatal geometry of his mistake. "You see, Victor," DeAndre said, setting his glass down on the desk and standing up. He moved with the terrifying grace of a panther. "You and my fiancée here made a fundamental miscalculation. You assumed I was vulnerable. You assumed my empire was crumbling. You believed a fabricated bankruptcy report I leaked to test the loyalty of the woman wearing my ring." Serafina gasped, her hands flying to her throat. "Fake. The bankruptcy. It was fake. Every dime is exactly where I left it," DeAndre said coldly, his gaze locking onto her. The absolute disgust in his eyes made Serafina physically shrink. "The offshore accounts, the Vanguard trusts, the real estate. I am richer today than I was yesterday. But you? You are entirely bankrupt, Serafina, morally and financially." DeAndre picked up the sleek black burner phone from his desk and tossed it casually. It landed at Serafina's feet. Beside it, he tossed the small glass vial of aconite. "Your decryption was sloppy, Victor," Silas noted from the corner, his gun perfectly steady, "and Miss Montgomery is a terrible chemist." Serafina fell to her knees, the black Saint Laurent dress pooling around her. The sheer terror of her reality finally broke through her arrogance. She crawled toward DeAndre's desk, tears streaming down her face, real tears this time, fueled by panic. "DeAndre, please," she sobbed, her voice shrill and desperate. "He forced me. Victor threatened my family. He made me put those drops in your drink. I love you, Dom. You have to believe me." DeAndre looked down at her, his face carved from stone. He didn't feel heartbreak. He felt nothing but a cold, clinical relief that he had excised a tumor before it could kill him. "You're a pathetic liar, Sarah," DeAndre said softly. "I read the transcripts. You approached him. You wanted the probate money before the imaginary federal indictment froze it. You sold my life for a percentage of the docs." He turned his attention back to the Bratva boss. "Victor, you are standing in my home with unauthorized weapons attempting to assassinate me. By all the laws of our world, you and your men should leave this penthouse in garbage bags." Volkov swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "What are your terms, Cavallo?" "The Brighton Beach territory," DeAndre demanded, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "The import routes through JFK, and your private casino operations in Atlantic City. You will sign the holding companies over to my legal team tonight. Then you will take your men, walk out of my building, and never cross into Manhattan again. If you refuse, Silas will execute you where you stand, and we will take your territory by force tomorrow morning." Volkov looked at the red laser dots painting his chest. He looked at Silas's unwavering grip on the submachine gun. He knew when he was beaten. Slowly he nodded. "Bring me the papers." Silence reclaimed the study the moment Viktor Volkov's gun hit the floor, heavy and absolute. The transition from the brink of a bloodbath to a boardroom negotiation was swift and jarring. Within 20 minutes, a trio of DeAndre's corporate lawyers' men in immaculate gray suits who moved with terrifying, silent efficiency arrived from a staging suite 3 floors below. They carried fine leather briefcases that held the doom of the Russian syndicate. The dismantling of Viktor Volkov was a masterclass in bureaucratic brutality. The study, thick with the smell of spilled scotch and the ozone of suppressed adrenaline, became the site of a total surrender. Volkov sat rigidly in a leather guest chair, his jaw clenched so tightly it looked ready to fracture. A lawyer placed a stack of crisp, watermarked documents on the desk. Volkov signed away decades of Bratva expansion. He signed away the Brighton Beach strongholds, the lucrative import routes bleeding out of JFK, and the untraceable casino operations in Atlantic City. His large, pale hands shook slightly with suppressed, impotent rage as the pen scratched against the paper. When the ink was finally dry, DeAndre gave a brief, dismissive nod. Volkov and his disarmed men were escorted out the service elevator by a phalanx of heavily armed guards. The Russian syndicate had been crippled without a single shot fired, excised from Manhattan like a tumor. Then there was only Serafina. She remained crumpled on the Persian rug, shivering violently. The exquisite black Saint Laurent dress, chosen meticulously for a performance of aristocratic mourning, now looked like a shroud wrapped around a ghost. In the Mafia movie she so openly despised, this was the part where she would be dragged out to a soundproofed van and buried deep in the Pine Barrens. She knew it, and the sheer terror of her reality finally shattered her arrogance completely. Dom, DeAndre, please," she whimpered, the sound scraping against the quiet walls. She pushed herself up onto her knees, crawling a few inches toward the massive oak desk. Her perfectly styled blonde hair was tangled, her mascara tracking dark, jagged lines down her pale cheeks. "He forced me. Victor threatened my family in the Hamptons. He made me put those drops in your drink. I love you, Dom. I swear to God I love you. You have to believe me." DeAndre looked down at her. He didn't feel heartbreak. He didn't feel the sting of betrayal anymore. Looking at her now, stripped of her calculated glamour and weaponized charm, he felt nothing but a cold, clinical relief. He had survived the poison, but more importantly, he had survived her. "You're a pathetic liar, Sarah," DeAndre said softly, his voice devoid of any heat or anger. "I read the decrypted logs. You approached him. You wanted the probate money before the imaginary federal indictment froze it. You sold my life for a percentage of the docs." He turned away from her, the dismissal absolute. Silas, take the ring. Silas Graham stepped out of the shadows. He did not ask, he simply moved. He grabbed Serafina's trembling left hand. He didn't use unnecessary violence, but there was zero gentleness in his grip as he forcefully slid the 6-carat Cartier diamond off her finger. Serafina let out a pathetic, breathless sob, clutching her bare hand to her chest as if she had been physically wounded. "You are leaving this penthouse with exactly what you brought into our relationship, nothing," DeAndre told her, staring up the floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering Manhattan skyline. "Your designer clothes, your jewelry, the cars, they remain here. You are officially blacklisted. If you attempt to contact me, my associates, or anyone in New York high society, I will release the decrypted communication logs of your murder plot directly to the district attorney. They will happily put you away for conspiracy to commit murder for the rest of your natural life. Dom, you can't just throw me out on the street. Have 2 men escort her to the lobby," DeAndre interrupted, speaking to Silas as if Serafina were no longer in the room. "Do not let her pack a bag. Confiscate her phone." Cough. Serafina was dragged out of the study by 2 stone-faced enforcers, sobbing hysterically and begging for a second chance that would never come. DeAndre let out a long, heavy exhale. The toxicity had finally been purged from his home. The air felt cleaner. He poured himself a glass of real Macallan, took a slow sip, and looked at Silas. "Bring her in," DeAndre commanded. A few moments later, the heavy mahogany doors of the study opened once more. Beatrice Miller stood in the doorway. She still wore her tight, plain maid's uniform, her large, calloused hands nervously twisting the fabric of her white apron. Her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Even though she knew Volkov and Serafina were gone, this was still the inner sanctum of a ruthless crime boss. Part of her mind whispered that she knew too much, that men like DeAndre tied up loose ends. She looked at the empty space on the rug where Serafina had groveled, and then her wide, anxious brown eyes met DeAndre's. DeAndre didn't sit behind his desk. He set his glass down, walked across the expansive room, and stopped just a few feet in front of Beatrice. The imposing, terrifying Mafia bosser man, who had just dismantled a rival syndicate with a pen and a glare, looked at the quiet, overweight woman who had been utterly invisible to the world. Slowly, deliberately, DeAndre bowed his head to her in a gesture of profound, unshakable respect. "You saved my life, Beatrice," DeAndre said gently, the coldness entirely gone from his voice. It was replaced by a warmth she had never heard him use before. "And you saved my empire. Serafina thought you were just part of the furniture. She thought you were blind and deaf, but you were the only one who saw the truth and the only one brave enough to act on it." Beatrice blushed deeply, a hot wave of embarrassment and relief washing over her. She looked down at her scuffed, practical work shoes. "I just did what was right, Mr. Cavallo. I couldn't let her hurt you. Not after you helped my mother. You were kind to me when no one else was." "About your mother," DeAndre said, gesturing warmly for Beatrice to sit in one of the plush leather guest chairs. Hesitantly she obeyed, the leather sinking comfortably beneath her weight. "Silas has already contacted the administration at Mount Sinai. The balance of her account has been completely wiped clean. Furthermore, she is being moved to the VIP recovery wing tomorrow morning. A private nurse will be assigned to her around the clock, fully funded by the Cavallo estate for as long as she needs it." Beatrice gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The crushing, suffocating weight of debt and fear that she had carried for months suddenly evaporated. Tears finally spilled over her cheeks, falling freely onto her apron. "Mr. Cavallo, I can never repay you. That is too much." "You already have," DeAndre corrected her firmly, stepping back and leaning against his desk. But we are not finished. I told you earlier tonight that you would never scrub another floor as long as you live, and I do not make promises I cannot keep. You have an incredible eye for detail, Beatrice. You understand true loyalty, you possess a fierce moral compass, and you do not panic under extraordinary pressure. Those are qualities I cannot buy. He reached behind him, picked up a heavy, cream-colored envelope from his desk, and held it out to her. I run a legitimate philanthropic foundation through Vanguard, primarily to handle community development, medical grants, and housing initiatives, DeAndre explained, his tone shifting to respectful professionalism. I need a new executive director. I need someone I can trust implicitly to manage those funds and ensure they actually go to the people who desperately need them, not to bureaucratic black holes or corrupt politicians. The starting salary is $500,000 a year. Inside that envelope is the contract, as well as the keys and deed to a newly renovated 4-bedroom brownstone in Park Slope, Brooklyn. It is fully in your name. Beatrice stared at the thick envelope in her trembling hands. It was heavier than anything she had ever held. It wasn't just paper and metal, it was the weight of a completely new existence. It was a life where she was respected, where her voice mattered, and where she was finally, undeniably visible. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking as she looked up at him through a blur of tears. "Why me? Because power is an illusion if you surround yourself with parasites," DeAndre said softly, his gaze sweeping over the opulent, quiet study before settling back on her. "I spent my life building walls and testing the wrong people. It's time I rewarded the right ones." In the ruthless, glittering underbelly of New York City, wealth and power often served as perfect camouflage for betrayal. DeAndre Cavallo's orchestrated downfall was designed to expose a gold digger, but it inadvertently unearthed a venomous predator willing to kill for a crown. Yet the true twist of fate lay in the shadows of the penthouse. Beatrice Miller, dismissed by society and entirely overlooked by the conspirators, proved that genuine loyalty cannot be bought with diamonds or demanded by fear. It is earned through quiet acts of humanity. By risking her own life to expose the sinister truth, the invisible Maid dismantled a Mafia war and saved a king. In the end, the beautiful, aristocratic fiancée was left with absolutely nothing, while the woman who had spent her life scrubbing floors inherited the respect, the wealth, and the visible power she had always deserved.